Good morning. My name is Professor Simon Bourne of the Institute of International Shipping and Trade Law at Swansea University, and this is the first of a series of short talks which I'm going to give about what is currently happening in the EU and how it might affect shipping and commercial interests. The first one, which I'm talking about today, is part one, climate change and shipping. The question posed is how bad are our emissions from shipping and what are the EU and the UK doing about it? Something which has become rather topical in the light of an announcement which came over the BBC News Today programme on Tuesday. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Right, shipping contributes about 80% of world trade. It's the most efficient way of getting goods transported in international trade, and we're looking at manufactured goods, raw materials and food. But there's a downside, that it is a 2.7% contributor to carbon dioxide emissions. Other greenhouse gas emissions also follow from international shipping. There can be nitrogen oxide, and also methane, particularly a problem with something called methane slip when you've got vessels fueled by LNG. Sulfur dioxide is a rather ambivalent gas in that it has detrimental effects to human health, but it's actually rather a good gas from the point of mitigating global warming, and there have been suggestions that we might mitigate by pumping sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. So that makes it a little bit ambivalent when we're thinking about the sulfur cap, which came in 2020 and caused a lot of consternation amongst ship owners. And is the sulfur cap actually going to be detrimental to mitigating climate change, because you're removing the vessel's sulfur dioxide emissions from the atmosphere, which may be a positive for mitigating climate change. Now, the two international agreements we've got on climate change are the Kyoto Agreement and the Paris Agreement, and shipping is in neither. It's not in Kyoto, it's not in Paris, and currently it doesn't form part of the UK's Climate Change Act 2008. It is not taken into account with regard to the UK's targets for achieving reduction in gases which cause climate change. That may be about to change. At the moment, shipping and greenhouse gas emissions, it's all down to the UN agency, the International Maritime Organization, and it has been doing quite a bit of work, particularly on sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide. It's starting to do work as regards carbon dioxide emissions, and of course we mustn't forget methane as well, which is another very bad greenhouse gas and tends to get overlooked. The IMO has dealt with air pollution through Annex 6, which deals with air pollution from shipping, and its strategy has been to regulate so as to make new vessels more energy efficient, that's EEDI, and it has introduced reporting obligations as regards the fuel used on vessels, and then it adopted specific reduction targets in 2018. I wonder why it did that. Well, if you look in November 2017, the EU Parliament was proposing to add shipping to a revised emissions trading system in the EU, and it was going to suggest to do that from 2023 if the IMO progress in its carbon dioxide reduction strategy was considered insufficient. And lo and behold, we get a reaction in April 2018 at MEPC 72 in the IMO, and the IMO now states its ambition. It's going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from shipping by 50% over the 2008 levels. Remember, that's quite a low baseline because of the financial crash which happened that year. So it's a 50% reduction over 2008 by 2050, while at the same time pursuing efforts towards phasing them out entirely. And then there's a carbon intensity reduction target, the amount of emissions relative to each ton of shipping cargo, and that should be 40% by 2030 and rise to 70% by 2050. And there's a specific reference that there should be a pathway of CO2 emissions reduction consistent with the Paris Agreement temperature goals. So the strategy is that there's a sort of threefold structure in the IMO. First of all, possible short-term measures could be measures finalized and agreed between 2018 and 2023, and that's under discussion now. Then there's the midterm measures, which are going to be discussed between 2023 and 2030. And then some possible long-term measures could be measures finalized and agreed by the committee beyond 2030. And I just would point out that with the current climate emergency, what do we mean by long-term measures? You know, we hear a lot about countries wanting to go carbon neutral by 2050 or 2060, which is all very nice, but actually there is an urgency about substantial reduction in emissions from greenhouse gases now. I mean, it's the present where things have to happen. Otherwise, we won't hit the target which the IPCC has suggested of confining global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels, and we certainly will be in difficulty of meeting the lesser target of confining those temperature rises to 2 degrees Celsius. If we have business as usual, we'll probably end up by the end of the century with between 3 and 4 degrees Celsius over that baseline, and that basically is game over for human civilization. It may be even game over for human beings. And in the light of that, I just point the IMO's intention to have the complete phasing out of greenhouse gas emissions by 2100. Now, one measure which would enable shipping to meet the 2030 targets, which the IMO has suggested as regards carbon intensity, is a cap on speed. Ship owners don't seem to like this, but all the other measures, such as more energy efficient ships, they're just not going to do that. If you want to hit that 2030 target, you need to cap speed. Here's a little demonstration from 2019. Remember those days when we could demonstrate and we didn't have to wear masks? Well, this is a demonstration outside the IMO's London headquarters, protesting about the lack of urgency and progress in the IMO on this issue. There are other pollutants. Black carbon is a particularly bad pollutant, and the IMO's report on greenhouse emissions, which came out last year, noted a substantial rise in the amount of black carbon emissions over I think since 2012. Methane is also a very bad greenhouse gas, and that emissions of methane, either directly or indirectly, in the shipping context, need to be addressed. That's particularly a problem for ships that are fueled by LNG. Ship owners in 2020 were proposing that there should be a $2 per ton bunker levy to fund research and development into alternative fuels. They are still proposing that, but perhaps rather more may need to be done in the immediate term. Can shipping decarbonise? Well, it's the possibility of new fuels, hydrogen fuel cells. Yes, that might be a very good thing, but at the moment they're not at the scale which could power a container ship. Some small ferries may be able to run on hydrogen fuel cells. Research is going on. I think at least one container line is looking into developing fuel cells which are capable of sufficient power to run a container ship. Sales, Renault in 2018 mentioned that it was going to commission car carriers powered primarily by sails. The disadvantage of that is that you probably halve the speed at which the ship can travel, but what's the harm in waiting? Liquid nitrogen gas. Now, this is something which is already in use, particularly I think some containers and some cruise ships. And there's been a lot of suggestion, why don't we just go over to liquid nitrogen gas? Well, for a start, it doesn't get rid of, I think you have a 25% reduction in CO2 gases. It's good at getting rid of sulfur dioxide. But there's something called methane slip, which happens with using LNG as a fuel. And that, unless that can be sorted out, you're just going to be going from one greenhouse gas to another. Ammonia is another possibility, ammonia as a fuel, and there's been recent developments which I was aware of in the excellent newsletter from a guy called Chris Goodall, which came through to my email box on Sunday evening, and apparently there's some very interesting research and some plans about using ammonia as a fuel. So there are potential alternative fuels which can be used, but they will need further development, further research, further development. And one thing you've got to bear in mind is that these fuels need to be produced by green renewable energy. There's no point getting all your ammonia from production processes which are using fossil fuel, because otherwise you're just sort of shifting shipping's GHG emissions off the ship onto the onshore production of either ammonia or hydrogen as a pure fuel. Some people have talked about blue fuels, whereby they're made by fossil fuels with fossil fuel energy, but CO2 emissions are captured. Well, carbon capture is still an uncertain proposition, and I wouldn't bank too much on that being the way out of our crisis. So, can shipping decarbonise? The immediate thing which could be done, which could lead to a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, would be slow steaming. Then there's electrification of the docks, so-called cold ironing, something which I think has already happened in at least one port in Sweden, and I think in Los Angeles as well. And that's great, so that the ship, instead of running its own fuel when it's at dock, it just plugs into the local grid and it gets its power from that. And that's fine as long as the power is from renewable energy. Indeed, there was a competition very recently. I'm afraid if you're interested in it, you've missed a deadline. It was 26th of March, a competition for to see what could be done about electrification of UK ports. Another thing which has been touted is that we could get some savings and reductions if we use bigger ships. And I just sort of, I couldn't resist sort of putting this picture in as the Ever Given turns into the Ever Stuck. It's now Ever Stuck legally, but it has physically removed from that position. There may be problems with bigger ships, as we can see here. So what's the EU been doing about it? Actually quite a lot. The EU has its own fuel reporting measures. I mentioned that the IMO had introduced fuel reporting measures. Well, the EU in 2015 introduced what's called the MRV, the Monitoring, Reporting and Verification Regulation, which applies to all ships coming in and out of the EU. And then there were some suggestions in early 2019 that this should be harmonized with the IMO rules on reporting. And then in December 2019, after Jean-Claude Juncker stepped down as head honcho in the EU and was replaced by Ursula von Leyen, we get the Green New Deal. And in the Green New Deal, there is quite a bit about shipping. International shipping ought to be put within the remit of the EU as regards its strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And what this then leads to is a report by Jutta Paulus in early 2020, which basically suggests that international shipping into and out of EU ports should go into the emissions trading scheme of the EU. And that means that your CO2 emissions will cost you. And that was put before the European Parliament, and they approved that amendment. And the key features of the amended MRV regulation, which have been approved, I think it was 16th of September in 2020. First of all, there should be a reduction for all ships coming in and out of the EU. The annual average CO2 emissions should be reduced by at least 40% by 2030 over a baseline of 2018, not the 2008 baseline which the IMO has got. Other greenhouse gases should be included in this. There's calls that methane and other greenhouse gases besides CO2 should be included, and there should be better supply of shoreside electricity in ports. And shipping the suggestion is it will be brought into the emissions trading scheme. There's also going to be an ocean fund from 2022 to 2030, which is going to be financed by revenues from auctioning allowances under the ETS. And that's going to be used to make ships more energy efficient and to support investment in innovative technologies and infrastructure, namely alternative fuels and green ports. And 20% of the fund revenue should go for protecting, restoring, and efficiently managing marine ecosystems which are impacted by global warming. For the ETS, it may not be possible for ship-owning companies to participate by buying and selling carbon credits in the traditional ETS method, and they will be allowed to bypass that and basically pay a simple contribution each year based on the amount of CO2 emissions which they have been using emitting in coming into and out of EU ports. But obviously, we know that the UK is no longer a member of the EU. So what about the UK? The UK has got its own ETS scheme, and a little reported piece of information which I got from Bloomberg, and was hardly reported anywhere. 22nd of March 21, this guy, Robert Courts, who's responsible for shipping in the UK government, and here he is out, I think he's MP for Witney, and there's a very attractive looking hostelry there for which he's just come out for his photo opportunity. And he said that we may, I include the word may in italics, include shipping in our very own ETS scheme. We must remember that the UK hosts COP26 in the autumn in Glasgow. And it's going to be a very important conference of the parties as regards greenhouse gas reductions. And this may prompt the UK to take the issue of greenhouse gas emissions from international shipping more seriously. And indeed, on the 20th of April, I heard on the Today programme, and again, details are still very, very thin, the UK announced it's going to have new climate change reduction targets. We're going to cut CO2 by 78% by 2035 compared with our 1990 levels. And then it's one of these things where they say, this is what the Prime Minister is going to say later in the week. Well, I'm still waiting for the official announcement, because I'm looking forward to it when it comes. But what struck me, these targets will include international aviation and international shipping. This is something the Climate Change Committee has been recommending for a while. In 2019, it recommended international shipping be included, and at the end of October 2019, our Prime Minister said, no, this ought to be left to international efforts. Well, there's been a change of heart, apparently. And anyway, we'll see what the details are, but this could potentially be very significant. So that's the news from the EU and the UK. The regulation, the amendments to the regulation are still being discussed under what is called the trilogue procedure in the EU, and doubtless we'll have further news before too long. But it is quite a radical proposal, because it is proposing that shipping be included in the ETS for all voyages into and out of the EU from the 1st of January next year. Now that's not too far away. Anyway, thank you for your attention. There will be 2 more recaps on developments in the EU which will affect either shipping or commercial matters generally. So look out for those, and thank you for your attention.